The sun was setting over the Sierra Nevada mountains, casting long shadows across the rugged trails of Pine Ridge National Park. It was a place where hikers came to escape the chaos of everyday life, seeking solace in nature's embrace. But on this particular evening, tranquility gave way to tragedy. James Carter, a 42-year-old software engineer from San Francisco, had decided to spend his weekend hiking alone, a rare indulgence for someone who spent most of their days glued to screens and deadlines. His wife, Rachel Carter, stayed behind, citing an important work deadline as her reason not to join him. That decision would later haunt her more than she could have imagined. At around 8 p.m., park rangers received a call about a body found near Eagles Peak, one of the park's most challenging climbs. When they arrived at the scene, they discovered James lying face down on the rocky trail, his hiking gear scattered nearby. At first glance, it appeared to be an unfortunate accident, perhaps a slip or misstep during the descent. But something didn't sit right with Ranger Mike Donovan. Donovan, a seasoned ranger with 20 years of experience under his belt, noticed subtle details that contradicted the initial assumption. For one, there were no visible signs of struggle or injury consistent with a fall. While James's headlamp lay broken beside him, its battery still held enough charge to suggest it hadn't been dropped accidentally. Stranger still, his water bottle was missing, even though his backpack remained intact just a few feet away. When local authorities took over the investigation, they quickly ruled out foul play based on superficial evidence. They concluded that exhaustion, dehydration, and poor visibility likely led to James losing his footing and tumbling off the narrow path. However, Rachel Carter wasn't convinced. She insisted that James was an experienced hiker who always carried two water bottles, one in his pack and another attached to his belt, and never ventured without proper preparation. Rachel handed investigators James's smartwatch, which she said he wore religiously during hikes to track his progress. A tech-savvy officer synced the device with a laptop, revealing data logs that painted a chilling picture. According to the watch, James had stopped moving abruptly at 5:47 p.m., well before sunset, and remained stationary until his heart rate flatlined nearly 3 hours later. This timeline contradicted the official narrative. If James had fallen, he should have died instantly or shortly after impact. Instead, the data suggested he lingered alive but immobile for hours, an eerie detail that raised questions nobody wanted to answer. Word of the discrepancy reached investigator Sarah Klein, a veteran detective known for her uncanny ability to unravel complex cases. With decades of experience solving homicides across California, Klein had earned a reputation for being relentless and thorough. When she reviewed the case file, her instincts told her something darker lurked beneath the surface. Klein requested access to all available evidence, including surveillance footage from the park entrance, GPS data from James's phone, which had mysteriously gone missing, and interviews with anyone who might have crossed paths with him that day. What she found so far only deepened the mystery. Witnesses reported seeing James chatting amiably with a stranger wearing dark sunglasses and a baseball cap earlier in the afternoon. Neither the man nor his vehicle description matched any records tied to regular visitors of the park. As Klein stood atop Eagles Peak, staring down at the spot where James's lifeless body was found, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just an accident or even a random act of violence. Someone had planned this meticulously, ensuring every loose end was tied except for one glaring oversight: the smartwatch. By the time Klein returned to her car, night had fully descended, blanketing the forest in silence. Yet in her mind, the gears were already turning. Who was the mysterious figure seen talking to James? Why did the smartwatch tell such a different story? And how far would someone go to make a death look like nothing more than bad luck? For now, these questions hung heavy in the air, waiting for answers buried deep within the wilderness, and perhaps deeper still in the hearts of those closest. The morning after James Carter's body was discovered, investigator Sarah Klein arrived at the Pine Ridge Sheriff's Department with a steaming cup of coffee in hand and a determined glint in her eye. She had spent the night poring over the case file, piecing together fragments of information that seemed disjointed but hinted at something far more sinister than a simple hiking accident. Today, she intended to dig deeper, starting with Rachel Carter. Rachel, a striking woman in her late 30s with sharp features and an air of quiet composure, sat across from Klein in a small interrogation room. Her hands were clasped tightly on the table, knuckles white against her pale skin. Though visibly shaken by the loss of her husband, Rachel maintained an unnerving calmness that intrigued Klein. It wasn't grief alone that radiated from her, it was something else, something harder to define. Mrs. Carter, Klein began, leaning forward slightly, I understand this is a difficult time for you, but I need your help to piece together what happened to James. Rachel nodded slowly. Of course, anything I can do. Klein opened the folder in front of her and slid out a photograph of James's smartwatch data log. We've reviewed the information from his watch. According to this, he stopped moving around 5:47 p.m. and remained stationary until his heart rate dropped to zero at approximately 8:30 p.m. Does that match up with anything unusual you noticed about his plans? Rachel hesitated, her brow furrowing as if trying to recall specific details. He told me he'd be back by dinner. He always texts when he's heading home. She paused, then added softly, but I didn't hear from him. Klein jotted down notes, watching Rachel carefully. Did James mention meeting anyone on the trail? Or did he express any concerns before leaving? No, Rachel replied firmly. He was looking forward to the hike. He loved Eagle's Peak. It was one of his favorite spots. Klein pressed further. And what about his phone? Do you know where it is now? Rachel shook her head. It wasn't with him when they found him. I assumed maybe it fell off the cliff or got lost during whatever happened. The detective studied Rachel's face for any flicker of unease, but saw only practiced poise. Still, Klein couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that Rachel might be holding something back. For now, though, she decided to shift focus. Next, Klein interviewed park rangers and other hikers who had been in the area on the day of James's death. Ranger Mike Donovan provided valuable insight into the terrain and weather conditions. The trail gets slippery near the summit, especially after rain, he explained, but we hadn't had any precipitation for days leading up to Saturday. The ground was dry. One witness, a middle-aged man named Greg Lawson, claimed to have seen James earlier that afternoon. He was taking photos near the overlook, Lawson recalled. There was another guy there too, kind of shady looking. They seemed friendly enough, but I remember thinking it was odd because James usually hikes alone. Can you describe the other man? Klein asked, pen poised over her notepad. Lawson shrugged. Not really. He wore sunglasses even though it was cloudy, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. Average height, maybe 5'10". Dark jacket. That's all I got. Though vague, the description matched what little evidence Klein had so far. Whoever this person was, they clearly didn't want to be identified. As the day wore on, Klein expanded her search beyond eyewitness accounts. She requested access to surveillance footage from the park's entrance gates, hoping to identify vehicles entering and exiting around the time of James's hike. What she found was intriguing. A silver sedan registered to a rental company entered the park at 10:15 a.m. and left shortly after sunset. The driver's license plate was partially obscured by mud, but forensic enhancement revealed partial numbers, matching a car rented under the name John Smith, a fake alias used frequently in crimes of convenience. Meanwhile, Klein revisited the crime scene itself. Standing at the edge of Eagle's Peak, she examined the area with fresh eyes. The broken headlamp, scattered gear, and absence of a water bottle suggested deliberate staging rather than natural chaos. There were no signs of defensive wounds on James's body, indicating he may not have anticipated danger. Yet the prolonged period between when he stopped moving and when he died pointed to foul play. Back at her office, Klein cross-referenced James's financial records and phone activity. Nothing stood out initially. He had no significant debts, no suspicious transactions, and no recent calls or texts to unknown numbers. However, a closer look at his calendar revealed a recurring appointment labeled Project Horizon every Thursday evening. When Klein questioned Rachel about it, she claimed ignorance. He never mentioned that to me, Rachel said, her voice steady, but her eyes darting toward the door. It must have been work-related. Klein made a mental note to investigate further. Something about Rachel's demeanor continued to unsettle her. Was it grief masking guilt, or was there more to the story? By the end of the day, Klein assembled a timeline based on the evidence gathered so far. 10 and 15 a.m. A suspicious vehicle enters the park. 2:30 p.m. Witnesses see James chatting with an unidentified man near the overlook. 5:47 p.m. James's smartwatch shows him stopping movement. 8:30 p.m. His heart rate flatlines. 9:15 p.m. Body discovered by park rangers. Each piece of the puzzle fit snugly into place, yet gaps remained. Who was the mysterious stranger? Why did James stop moving hours before dying? And why would someone go to such lengths to stage his death as an accident? As Klein closed the case file for the night, her thoughts drifted to Rachel Carter. The widow's composed exterior masked emotions Klein couldn't quite decipher. Whether she was grieving, hiding secrets, or both, one thing was certain. Rachel held answers Klein desperately needed. Tomorrow, Klein vowed to turn up the heat, because somewhere in this tangled web of lies and half-truths lay the truth. And justice for James Carter demanded nothing less. The sun rose over Pine Ridge, casting a golden hue across the mountains that seemed to mock the grim task ahead. Investigator Sarah Klein arrived at her office early, determined to untangle the web of contradictions surrounding James Carter's death. The previous day's interviews and evidence had painted a fragmented picture, but today she planned to focus on two critical leads: Project Horizon and the mysterious stranger seen with James near Eagles Peak. Klein started by delving deeper into James's work life. A quick call to his employer revealed that he was indeed involved in a project labeled Horizon, though management insisted it was routine software development. When pressed for specifics, however, their answers became evasive, prompting Klein to request access to internal communications. She also reached out to James's colleagues, hoping someone might shed light on what exactly Horizon entailed. Her first breakthrough came from an unexpected source: James's junior colleague, Mia Torres. Over coffee at a quiet cafe near downtown San Francisco, Mia hesitated before speaking. James didn't talk much about work outside the office, she admitted, fiddling with her napkin. But I overheard him arguing with someone on the phone last week. He sounded scared. Do you remember anything specific? Klein asked, leaning forward. Mia shook her head. Not really. Just something about not backing down and too late to stop now. It was weird because James was always so calm, the kind of guy who never raised his voice. Klein jotted down notes, her mind racing. If James had been embroiled in some kind of conflict related to his job, it could explain why someone might want him dead. But who? And how did this tie into the events at Pine Ridge? Meanwhile, forensic analysis of James's smartwatch yielded additional clues. While the device hadn't captured audio or video, its GPS data revealed a curious pattern. At 4:23 p.m., James deviated from the main trail, heading toward a less traveled path known as Whispering Pines, a secluded area rarely visited by hikers due to its dense foliage and steep inclines. This detour coincided with the time frame when Greg Lawson reported seeing James with the mysterious stranger. Armed with this new information, Klein returned to Pine Ridge National Park. Accompanied by Ranger Mike Donovan, she trekked along Whispering Pines, searching for anything overlooked during the initial investigation. About halfway through the trail, they stumbled upon a small clearing partially hidden by overgrown bushes. In the center lay a discarded water bottle, its label matching the brand James favored. Donovan knelt beside it, inspecting the ground. Looks like there was a struggle here, he murmured, pointing to scuff marks and flattened vegetation. And these indentations, they look like boot prints. Klein's pulse quickened. She snapped photos and collected the bottle for further testing, noting the significance of its location. Whoever took James's water bottle likely intended to create the illusion of dehydration or exhaustion, a detail meant to support the accidental death narrative. Back at the lab, technicians confirmed traces of chloroform inside the bottle. Someone had tampered with it, rendering James unconscious before moving him to Eagles Peak. The prolonged period between when he stopped moving and when he died now made chilling sense. James had been incapacitated, left to die slowly while his assailant covered their tracks. With this revelation, Klein turned her attention back to Rachel Carter. Though Rachel had cooperated thus far, Klein couldn't shake the feeling that she was withholding crucial details. To test her theory, Klein decided to re-interview Rachel, but this time under more pressure. Rachel arrived at the station looking weary but composed, her polished exterior showing no cracks despite the mounting scrutiny. Klein wasted no time cutting to the chase. "Mrs. Carter," she began, sliding a photo of the water bottle across the table. "Does this look familiar?" Rachel glanced at the image briefly before shaking her head. "Number should it?" "It belonged to James," Klein explained. "We found it off the main trail filled with traces of chloroform. Someone used it to knock him out before staging his death." Rachel's composure faltered slightly, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. "That's horrible, but I don't see how this helps find who did it." Klein leaned closer, her tone sharpening. "Actually, it raises some questions. For instance, why would someone go to such lengths to make his death look accidental unless they were trying to protect themselves or someone else?" Rachel's eyes narrowed. "Are you suggesting I had something to do with this?" "I'm suggesting you know more than you're letting on," Klein countered. "Your husband was meeting with someone the day he died. Colleagues say he was stressed about a project called Horizon, yet you claim to know nothing about it. Why is that?" For the first time, Rachel's mask slipped. Her jaw tightened and her voice wavered. "I told you, I didn't ask about his work. We both had busy lives. Sometimes things stayed separate." Klein studied her carefully, sensing vulnerability beneath the defensiveness. "Separate enough that you didn't notice your husband was afraid? Or that he wasn't himself in the days leading up to his death?" Rachel hesitated, then sighed heavily. "Fine. There was tension. He mentioned being pressured at work, but he wouldn't elaborate. I thought it was just stress. Now I realize it might have been more serious." Though unsatisfying, Rachel's admission provided context, if not clarity. Klein shifted tactics, probing instead about James's personal relationships. "Did he have any enemies? Anyone who might wish him harm?" Rachel shook her head. "Not that I know of. He kept mostly to himself outside of work." As the interview concluded, Klein thanked Rachel for her cooperation, but remained unconvinced. Something still didn't add up. Whether Rachel was complicit or simply clueless, Klein resolved to dig deeper into her alibi. Later that evening, Klein reviewed surveillance footage from Rachel's neighborhood. Cameras captured her leaving home around noon on the day of James's hike, purportedly to run errands. However, one clip showed her car parked outside a local diner for nearly 2 hours, a detail Rachel hadn't mentioned. Inside the diner, security cameras revealed her meeting with a man whose face was partially obscured by shadows. Klein froze the frame, her heart pounding. Could this be the same stranger seen with James earlier that day? By the end of the day, Klein felt closer to unraveling the truth, but the threads only led to more questions. Who was the man in the diner? What role did Project Horizon play in James's demise? And most importantly, could Rachel Carter truly be trusted? As darkness fell over Pine Ridge once again, Klein vowed to keep pushing until every secret came to light. Justice for James depended on it, and she wouldn't rest until she uncovered the full story. The next morning, investigator Sarah Klein arrived at the diner where Rachel Carter had met the mysterious man. It was a modest establishment on the outskirts of town. Weathered wooden walls, neon signs flickering faintly in the window, and the faint aroma of coffee lingering in the air. To the casual observer, it seemed like any other roadside eatery, but to Klein, it was a potential gold mine of information. She approached the counter, flashing her badge at the middle-aged waitress behind the register. "I'm looking into an investigation," she explained. "Can you tell me if you remember seeing this woman here last Saturday?" She slid a photo of Rachel across the counter. The waitress squinted at the image, then nodded. "Yeah, I remember her. She comes in sometimes. Always polite. Leaves a good tip." "And did she meet anyone that day?" Klein pressed. The waitress thought for a moment before answering. "Yeah, there was a guy with her. They sat in the back booth, kept to themselves. Didn't order much. Just coffee." "Anything unusual about him? Can you describe him?" "He wore a baseball cap and sunglasses, even inside. Kind of weird, but not unheard of around here. Medium build, maybe late 30s or early 40s. Had a scar on his left hand. I noticed because he paid cash, and I saw it when he handed me the money. Klein's pulse quickened. A scar on the left hand could be a crucial identifier. Did they seem friendly, arguing? Anything stand out about their interaction? They were quiet, the waitress replied. But now that you mention it, he looked nervous, kept glancing toward the door like he was expecting someone, or trying to make sure no one saw him. Klein thanked the waitress and reviewed the diner's security footage again. Though grainy, the video confirmed what the waitress had described. Rachel sitting across from the man, their body language tense. At one point, Rachel leaned forward, gesturing emphatically, while the man recoiled slightly, his hand moving instinctively to his pocket, as if reaching for something. Klein froze the frame, zooming in on the man's face. Though partially obscured by the brim of his hat and sunglasses, she managed to isolate enough features to run through facial recognition software. Hours later, the system returned a match. Marcus Hale, a former private investigator turned freelance operative with a murky reputation. His record included charges of extortion, bribery, and illegal surveillance, all dismissed due to lack of evidence. Klein wasn't surprised to find ties between Marcus Hale and James's death. Men like him thrived in the shadows, hired to handle dirty work others couldn't afford to leave traces of. But why would Rachel Carter hire such a person? And what role did he play in James's final hours? Determined to confront Hale, Klein tracked him down to a seedy motel on the outskirts of Sacramento. The room reeked of stale cigarettes and cheap cologne as she knocked sharply on the door. After a long pause, it creaked open just wide enough for Hale to peer out. "Marcus Hale?" Klein asked, holding up her badge. Hale's eyes narrowed, but he didn't resist as Klein stepped inside. "What's this about?" he demanded, crossing his arms defensively. "It's about James Carter," Klein replied, watching his reaction closely. For a split second, Hale's composure faltered. A flicker of recognition crossed his face before he masked it with indifference. "Never heard of him," Klein smirked. "That's funny because we have footage of you meeting with his wife 2 days before he died. Care to explain?" Hale sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I'm just a guy who gets paid to do jobs. Whatever you're thinking, I didn't kill anyone." "Then talk," Klein said firmly. "Who hired you? What were you doing with Rachel Carter?" After a tense silence, Hale relented. "Fine. A lawyer contacted me last month, said a client needed some discreet assistance. He didn't give me names, just instructions. I was supposed to follow James Carter, gather intel on his movements, habits, anything useful." "Useful for what?" "I don't ask questions," Hale snapped. "I deliver results. All I know is the client wanted to know when and where James would be hiking alone. That's all." Klein's stomach churned. If someone orchestrated James's isolation on the trail, it meant his death was premeditated, not random. "And the client? Who was it?" "No idea," Hale admitted. "Payments came through encrypted accounts, untraceable. My guess? Someone with deep pockets and a reason to keep things quiet." Klein pressed further. "Did you see James the day he died? Were you at Pine Ridge?" Hale hesitated, then shook his head. "Number Y dropped off the info and washed my hands of it. Whoever killed him, it wasn't me." Though skeptical, Klein believed him, for now. Hale wasn't smart enough to orchestrate something this complex. He was merely a pawn in a larger game. Still, his testimony added another layer to the puzzle. Returning to her office, Klein revisited the timeline, piecing together new insights. Weeks prior. An unknown client hires Marcus Hale to surveil James Carter. Days prior. Rachel meets Hale at the diner, possibly to discuss logistics or payments. Day of death. James deviates from the main trail, encounters the mysterious stranger, likely Hale's replacement, and is incapacitated using chloroform. But one question loomed largest. Why would Rachel involve herself in such a scheme? Unless? Klein's thoughts turned back to Project Horizon. If James's work-related stress stemmed from something illicit or dangerous, perhaps Rachel feared for her own safety, or worse, stood to gain from his demise. Life insurance policies, shared assets, corporate secrets, it all pointed to motive. To test her theory, Klein subpoenaed James's financial records and discovered a hefty life insurance policy, naming Rachel as the sole beneficiary. While not uncommon in marriages, the timing raised eyebrows. The policy had been updated just 3 months earlier, doubling its value without James's knowledge. Armed with this revelation, Klein prepared to confront Rachel once more. This time, she wouldn't let her slip away so easily. The confrontation with Rachel Carter took place in a sterile interrogation room at the Pine Ridge Sheriff's Department. Investigator Sarah Klein had waited until late afternoon, allowing the weight of suspicion to build before summoning Rachel. She wanted Rachel unsettled, off balance, and judging by the faint tremor in her hands as she entered the room, Klein knew she'd succeeded. "Mrs. Carter," Klein began, sliding a folder across the table, "we need to talk about your husband's life insurance policy." Rachel glanced at the document but avoided making direct eye contact. "What about it?" "It was updated 3 months ago," Klein explained, her tone measured but firm. "Doubling its value. Did you know about that?" Rachel hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of the folder. "Yes, I did. James told me he wanted to make sure I'd be taken care of if something happened to him." "That's interesting," Klein replied, leaning back in her chair. "Because according to our records, James never authorized those changes. They were made using forged paperwork." Rachel's face paled visibly, her composure cracking for the first time. "That's impossible. He must have done it himself. I swear I didn't." "Then how do you explain this?" Klein interrupted, pulling out a copy of the forged signature. "It matches your handwriting, Mrs. Carter. We had a forensic expert analyze it." Rachel stared at the paper, her breathing quickening. For several moments she said nothing, clearly grappling with the implications. Finally she spoke, her voice trembling. Okay, fine. I signed the papers. But only because James asked me to. He was paranoid lately. Kept saying someone might try to hurt him. He thought increasing the policy would protect us if anything went wrong." Klein raised an eyebrow. "And you expect me to believe that? Your husband was scared enough to fake his own signature, yet he didn't think to report these threats to the police?" Rachel looked away, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know what else to tell you. I didn't kill him, Sarah. I loved him." Klein let the silence stretch, studying Rachel's reaction. Grief, guilt, or desperation? It was hard to say, but one thing was certain. Rachel wasn't telling the whole truth. Shifting tactics, Klein decided to confront her with another piece of evidence. "We also found traces of chloroform in James's water bottle, the same bottle we recovered near Whispering Pines. Do you know anything about that?" Rachel shook her head vehemently. "No, absolutely not. I couldn't." "Someone tampered with it," Klein cut in. "They used it to knock James unconscious before moving him to Eagles Peak. Does that sound like the work of a random hiker to you?" Rachel buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking as sobs overtook her. When she finally looked up, her mascara-streaked face was a portrait of despair. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she whispered. Klein leaned forward, her voice low and steady. "Mean for what to happen, Rachel? Tell me everything." Rachel took a deep breath, steadying herself. "A few months ago, James came home acting strange. He said he'd stumbled onto something big at work, something dangerous. He wouldn't give me details, but he mentioned Project Horizon repeatedly. At first, I thought he was exaggerating, but then he started receiving threatening messages. Anonymous emails, calls late at night. He was terrified." Klein listened intently, jotting down notes. "Did he ever specify what Project Horizon involved?" "No," Rachel admitted, "but he hinted it had something to do with corporate espionage. He accused someone high up in the company of stealing proprietary software and selling it to competitors. He said they threatened to silence him if he didn't back off." "And you believed him?" "Yes," Rachel replied without hesitation. "James wasn't the type to lie about things like that. He begged me not to involve the authorities. He said it would only make things worse. So we hired Marcus Hale to keep tabs on whoever was threatening him. We just wanted to stay safe." Klein frowned, but hiring Hale didn't stop James from dying. In fact, it looks like it put him directly in harm's way. "I know," Rachel sobbed. "After James died, I realized how reckless it was. But I swear, I never intended for anyone to get hurt. I thought Hale could protect us, not lead them straight to James." Klein paused, processing Rachel's confession. While it shed light on some aspects of the case, it left others unanswered. If Rachel wasn't responsible for James's death, who was? And why go through such elaborate lengths to stage it as an accident? To find answers, Klein turned her attention back to James's workplace. Armed with a warrant, she subpoenaed internal communications related to Project Horizon. What she uncovered sent shockwaves through the investigation. Emails revealed that James had been secretly investigating allegations of intellectual property theft within his company. According to his notes, a senior executive named Victor Langston had orchestrated the sale of sensitive algorithms to a rival firm, netting millions in illicit profits. James had gathered substantial evidence against Langston, but feared retaliation if he exposed the scheme publicly. Digging deeper, Klein discovered that Langston had recently filed for bankruptcy despite maintaining an extravagant lifestyle. Financial records showed large cash deposits into offshore accounts linked to shell companies, a clear sign of embezzlement. With this new information, Klein arranged a meeting with Victor Langston under the guise of discussing cybersecurity protocols. Langston, a polished man in his 50s with slick-back hair and an air of arrogance, greeted her cordially in his office. "Detective Klein," he said, gesturing to a chair. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Klein wasted no time cutting to the chase. "We're investigating the death of James Carter. Did you know him?" Langston's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Of course, tragic loss. Such a talented engineer. He was working on something called Project Horizon," Klein continued. "Ring any bells?" Langston shrugged. "Not really. Sounds like one of those internal initiatives no one pays attention to." Klein slid a printout of James's findings across the desk. "Funny because according to these documents, it rings a lot of bells for you. Care to explain why your name keeps coming up in connection with stolen software?" For the first time, Langston's composure cracked. His jaw tightened and his eyes darted toward the door. "I have no idea what you're talking about. Those documents are fabricated." "They're not," Klein countered. "And neither are the bank transfers funneling money into your accounts. Someone tipped you off that James was on to you, didn't they? That's why you lured him to Pine Ridge, to silence him permanently." Langston stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger. "This conversation is over. If you accuse me of anything further, my lawyers will hear about it." As he stormed out of the room, Klein felt a surge of satisfaction. She hadn't expected him to confess outright, but his reaction confirmed her suspicions. Langston was involved, and now she had enough evidence to bring him in for questioning. Back at the station, Klein pieced together the final fragments of the puzzle. Months prior, James uncovers Langston's illegal activities and begins gathering evidence. Weeks prior, Langston learns of James's investigation and hires someone to eliminate the threat. Days prior, Rachel, fearing for her husband's safety, hires Marcus Hale to monitor James's movements, an act that inadvertently aids Langston's plan. Day of death. James is incapacitated, moved to Eagles Peak, and left to die while Langston covers his tracks. The pieces fit perfectly. All that remained was to prove Langston's guilt beyond doubt and ensure justice for James Carter. The next morning, investigator Sarah Klein arrived at the Pine Ridge Sheriff's Department with a sense of purpose. She had spent the night reviewing every shred of evidence against Victor Langston, meticulously organizing it into a timeline that left no room for doubt. Today, she intended to bring him in and make sure he didn't walk away. Langston was summoned to the station under the pretense of discussing cybersecurity protocols once again. When he arrived, flanked by two impeccably dressed attorneys, Klein greeted him with a polite smile. "Mr. Langston, thank you for coming in. Please, have a seat." As they settled into the interrogation room, Langston exuded confidence, his demeanor calm and collected. His lawyers exchanged smug glances, clearly expecting another futile attempt to pin something on their client. But Klein wasn't there to bluff. "Let's cut to the chase," she began, sliding a stack of documents across the table. "We've uncovered substantial evidence linking you to the theft of proprietary software from your company. These emails, financial records, and bank transfers paint a damning picture. Care to explain?" Langston glanced at the papers briefly before dismissing them with a wave of his hand. "These are baseless accusations. I assure you, Detective, I've done nothing illegal." Klein leaned forward, her tone sharpening. "Then perhaps you can explain why James Carter was investigating you? Or why he ended up dead shortly after discovering your scheme." For the first time, Langston's facade faltered. A flicker of unease passed over his face, though he quickly masked it with indignation. I had nothing to do with James's death. He was a valued employee, an asset to the company. His passing is tragic, but it has nothing to do with me. Oh, I think it does, Klein countered. See, we know James uncovered your involvement in selling sensitive algorithms to competitors. We also know you panicked when he started asking questions, so you decided to silence him permanently. Langston's lawyer interjected, his voice clipped. Detective, my client has cooperated fully with your investigation. You're grasping at straws here. Klein ignored him, focusing instead on Langston. Tell me about Whispering Pines. Why did you choose that location? Did you think dumping his body near Eagle's Peak would throw us off your trail? Langston's eyes widened ever so slightly, betraying his shock at the mention of the secluded path. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered. Klein pressed on relentlessly. We found traces of chloroform in James's water bottle, the same substance used to incapacitate him. And guess what else? Surveillance footage places you entering Pine Ridge National Park on the day of his death. Your rental car even matches tire tracks found near the scene. At this, Langston visibly tensed, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. His lawyers exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the tide turning against them. To drive her point home, Klein played audio recordings obtained through a court order. They featured phone conversations between Langston and an unknown accomplice, likely the mysterious stranger seen with James near the overlook. In one clip, Langston could be heard instructing the man to take care of it and ensure there were no loose ends. This is absurd, Langston snapped, slamming his fist on the table. You're fabricating evidence to frame me. No fabrication necessary, Klein replied coolly. Your own words condemn you. Now who helped you? Who did you hire to carry out the murder? Langston refused to answer, sinking back into his chair as his lawyers whispered urgently in his ear. Realizing further denial was futile, they requested a recess to confer privately with their client. While they stepped out, Klein reviewed the case file one last time. Every piece of evidence pointed squarely at Langston. The stolen software, the illicit funds, the surveillance footage, and now the incriminating phone calls. Still, she knew prosecuting him wouldn't be easy, not without identifying his accomplice. Her thoughts turned to Marcus Hale. Though he claimed ignorance about James's death, Klein suspected he might know more than he let on. Returning to the motel where she'd questioned him earlier, she found Hale packing hastily, clearly intending to flee town. Going somewhere? She asked, stepping into the doorway. Hale froze, then forced a laugh. Just relocating. Business isn't great around here lately. Klein crossed her arms, her expression unyielding. Funny, because I was about to offer you a deal. Help me identify the man who killed James Carter, and I'll see what I can do about reducing your charges. Hale hesitated, weighing his options. Finally, he sighed and slumped onto the edge of the bed. Fine. The guy's name is Derek Cole. He's a freelancer. I've worked with him before. Langston hired him to handle the field work. Klein nodded, jotting down the name. Where can I find him? Last I heard, he was holed up in Tahoe. But good luck catching him. He's slippery. With this new lead, Klein wasted no time assembling a team to track down Derek Cole. Meanwhile, she returned to the station, where Langston and his lawyers awaited her. Here's the deal, she told them bluntly. We already have enough to charge you with corporate espionage and conspiracy to commit murder. Cooperate, and maybe the DA will consider leniency. Keep stonewalling, and you'll rot in prison while we build an ironclad case against you. Langston's resolve crumbled. Beaten and cornered, he confessed to orchestrating James's death, though he insisted he hadn't pulled the trigger himself. Derek Cole did it, he admitted bitterly. I paid him to take care of the problem. I never meant for it to go this far. Klein suppressed a grim smile. Justice for James Carter was finally within reach. All that remained was to apprehend Cole and close the final chapter of this twisted tale. The sun rose over Lake Tahoe, its shimmering waters reflecting the crisp morning light. Investigator Sarah Klein stood at the edge of a quiet marina, her team spread out strategically around the area. They had tracked Derek Cole to a lakeside cabin owned under a false name, an alias linked to several low-profile jobs in the criminal underworld. If Langston's confession was accurate, this was the man who had carried out James Carter's murder. Klein approached the cabin cautiously, flanked by two deputies. The structure was modest but well-maintained, its wooden exterior blending seamlessly with the surrounding pine trees. Inside, faint movements suggested someone was home. "Derek Cole!" Klein called out, her voice firm and authoritative. "This is Investigator Klein with the Pine Ridge Sheriff's Department. We have a warrant for your arrest. Come out peacefully." For a moment there was silence. Then the sound of footsteps echoed from within. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a wiry man in his early 40s, with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. He raised his hands in surrender, though his expression betrayed no fear, only resignation. "I figured you'd show up eventually," Cole said, his tone casual, almost mocking. Klein stepped forward, handcuffs ready. "Derek Cole, you're under arrest for the murder of James Carter. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the deputies led him away, Klein searched the cabin, uncovering a trove of incriminating evidence. Burner phones, forged IDs, and detailed notes outlining the plan to incapacitate James and stage his death as an accident. Among the items was a crumpled receipt from a hardware store near Pine Ridge, dated the day before James's hike. It listed chloroform among the purchases. With Cole in custody, Klein returned to the station, where Victor Langston awaited trial. Both men were charged accordingly. Langston with conspiracy to commit murder, corporate espionage, and obstruction of justice. Cole with first-degree murder and accessory to theft. Their fates would now rest in the hands of a jury. Rachel Carter, meanwhile, faced lesser charges for her role in hiring Marcus Hale. Though she hadn't directly participated in James's death, her actions had inadvertently facilitated it. In exchange for her cooperation during the investigation, prosecutors agreed to recommend leniency, a decision that sparked mixed reactions from the public. Some sympathized with Rachel, believing she had acted out of fear for her husband's safety. Others condemned her for failing to report the threats sooner. In the weeks that followed, Klein reflected on the case, piecing together how everything had unfolded. Months prior, James uncovers Victor Langston's illegal activities and begins gathering evidence. Weeks prior, Langston learns of James' investigation and hires Derek Cole to eliminate the threat. Days prior, Rachel, fearing for James's life, hires Marcus Hale to monitor his movements, an act that inadvertently aids Langston's plan. Day of death. James is lured off the main trail, incapacitated with chloroform, and left to die on Eagle's Peak while Langston covers his tracks. It was a chilling reminder of how greed and desperation could unravel lives, and how even the most meticulous plans could unravel under scrutiny. At James's memorial service, held in a small chapel overlooking San Francisco Bay, Klein watched silently as friends and colleagues paid their respects. Rachel sat in the front row, clutching a photo of her late husband, tears streaming down her face. Whether genuine or performative, her grief underscored the tragedy of it all. Afterward, Klein approached Rachel briefly. "He deserved better," she said simply, offering a nod of acknowledgement before walking away. Back at her office, Klein filed the final report, closing the case officially. As she stared at the stack of papers, the culmination of weeks of relentless pursuit, she felt a sense of closure. Justice for James Carter had been served, but the scars left behind would linger for years to come. And yet, as she gazed out the window at the distant mountains of Pine Ridge, Klein reminded herself why she did what she did. For every shadow cast by human frailty, there was always a chance to bring light.